Hello everybody and welcome to DC Fine Art. Today we are going to be working with oil pastels. I have here the Rubens oil pastels. They are a metallic type of pastel. And then I'm going to be working with the Sennelier. And these here is a 72 set of assorted oil pastels. And so I'm just going to be using the metallics basically for the background and for the little horseshoe on this pig I'm going to be doing, and it's right here. So if you're wanting to see this video a little bit longer of a video of how I did this and just kind of a little bit slower, then I will have this on my Patreon, and I have the link for it listed in the description below and also on the left side of the screen. And there I will actually have this one here for free. You do not have to be a Patreon to be able to see this one, but it will be loaded probably in the next few days, like at least a couple days before I can get that one out. But that way you can kind of see how my videos are on my Patreon. So that way you can get a little bit of a sample there for you. So right now I am just going through and just putting down this layer of oil pastel, and it is the metallic. I think it's more of a kind of like a maroon kind of color of oil pastel. It does have a shimmer to it. And so I'm going to lay this down on top, and after it's covered, then I'm going to go through with a gold metallic pastel, and actually it could be more of an orangey kind of copper look. And I'm just going to make some swirls on here. I'm not going to cover up the whole entire thing or anything. I'm just going to actually just cover up the top, do some little swirls, just so that way there's a mixture of it in there. I still want some of that maroon kind of showing through. And I'm probably going to go down probably right to his arms, or right at the below his little elbows there. Now this will be a kind of like a St. Patrick's kind of theme. It's got like little shamrocks on the pig, so I'm going to be doing that. So here I am just kind of layering this in. I am a little bit slower on how I work, so I do speed it up just a little bit just because of how slow I actually work. I work more comfortable like that. So once I get that done and I got my gold in, I'm going to dip my brush into the OMS that I have here, which is odorless mineral spirits. And I'm going to come through and just basically blend it and work it in. Now, the background or the product that I'm working on, the board, it's actually a pastel board by Ampersand. And that's what I'm working on with it. So I don't have to worry about the paper or anything. So I'm just making sure I got plenty of OMS on my brush, and I'm just melting that pigment down and blending it out so that way the board is covered underneath and I have more of a smoother blend. So I'm going to do all of the maroon color first when blending. Then I will start working my way up toward the gold and start blending that out. So I'm making sure I have enough OMS. I do dab it out on my little paper towel there, so that way I don't have too much. I don't want it dripping wet because I do want it to dry so I can work on it some more if needed. So here I'm speeding things up a little bit. Now I'm going to go and start blending out some of this gold. And basically this fills in any kind of gaps that I have where you can see some of that gray board showing through. It will fill that in. And if you have enough of the OMS on there and you go back and start blending it some more, it has time to kind of melt that, and I can actually smooth it out a little bit if needed. So once that's done, I came through and just kind of added some other colors to it. Now it was still wet when I tried doing this, so not a lot of the pigment came off of my oil pastel. If you're wanting to add more pigment to it, I would probably suggest letting it kind of dry just for a little bit. Give it like maybe an hour or two, probably less than that. Even if you gave it like another like 30 minutes or 45 minutes to dry, more of your pigment will come off of your oil pastel. So I got through adding a little bit of purple, maybe some little silvers in there, and now I'm coming up with my brush and just kind of blending that out too. So now I'm going to come through, probably add some other little colors in here, maybe like more of a fuchsia kind of color, some silvers, just to kind of make some sort of background design in there is all I was really wanting. And I'm still using the metallics on my oil pastel, kind of going in a direction of up and down. And then I'm going to go over the top of him, kind of using the same direction and up and down motion. So that way, if there's any kind of streaks, it's going to go in the same direction. So here I'm going to hold this up so that way you can kind of see some of the shimmer. There'll be a little bit more shimmer once it dries or once you varnish it. So moving on to the next step, I'm going to first put in, as you can see, I do have the reference photo up there on the top left-hand corner, and I'm just going to come in and put in my highlights first. So I'm putting in some whites. Now I did put in some grays in there for some highlights, but the grays didn't really turn out that great, so I ended up going over on top of it and adding white, but that's toward the end. So I'm just basing everything off my reference photo on adding in these whites. If I'm needing to make more of a more sharper edge to those highlights, then I'm trying to use a sharper edge on my oil pastel. So after my highlights are in, I'm going to be working on his head. Now here I am just using some flesh tones and I'm kind of testing them out. Like I had some that were super close together on the way they looked. So I'm just kind of doing some streaks here just to kind of see what types of tones they are and which ones I want to kind of keep for either a lighter tone or more of a neutral tone. Some of them have a little bit more pinks than the others. So I'm just kind of testing these out. So here's another one, and I wanted to see what that was like. And that one ended up being a little bit more, have a little bit more of a pinkish tone color to it. I keep my eye on the reference photo just to kind of see if it's something that I really want to work with or if I want to go back to the other, which I did. So now I'm just going to look at my reference photo and just kind of put these flesh tones in there. I tried out this violet color that I had, and it was just way too light. It's nothing dark. So then in order to make my shadows that I was using there, I either used my sepia or like a reddish tone on top of that sepia, or you can even use brown for shadowing. So there's my brown. I kind of came in there and added a little bit of brown on top of my flesh tones where the shadow would be. Now, once these blend out, it definitely comes all together. Layered in a little bit more flesh tone to it. Making little marks where his little smile is going to be with my sepia. Now I'm going to come in and fill in around his little mouth area and chin with more of the flesh tone. Using some more of that. Actually, I'm using a brown here just to kind of underline his nose where the shadow would be. Going back to my sepia, maybe add a little bit of a darker tone to it. I tried adding some of that purple again, but still didn't really care for it too much, so I put my flesh tone over the top of it. Adding a little bit of a pinkish tone color, so that way we got some of that pink tone like in the reference photo. And I will come back in and add a little bit of red to the top of that just to make it a little bit darker. Drawing some circles where his little nostrils is going to be. A little bit of brown in the center just to kind of give it a shadow. Coming in and add a little bit of a highlight to his nose. Now I'm adding a little bit of pink here just for his little cheeks to have that little blush that he's got on the side of his smile. Adding a little bit of red tone to the top of the pink there. Give it a little bit more of a deeper color. And now adding in some of my flesh tone underneath his nose where his lip area is at. Still kind of putting in those highlights. If I ended up kind of wiping some of those out, I'll put them back in. Drawing his little eyes and putting some sepia in the center. Using a little bit of white for some highlight around the bottom of his nostrils. Now here's where I use some of that gray tone for like a highlight. And after I ended up doing that and blending it all out, I didn't really care for it too much, so I waited for it to dry. And once it was dry enough, I came back over it, the top of it, and corrected it by adding some more whites and some more flesh tones to it. So there I am filling in with some more of the flesh tone. So I'm going around his ear. I'm just kind of looking at the reference photo and where my just my regular flesh tone would be and just kind of outlining it. If I end up needing a darker tone of flesh, then I'll end up adding more of my brown to it to kind of give it that shadow, or a little bit lighter of a flesh tone. I do have that, or some white on top. Kind of making sure I got that highlight and the flesh tone kind of coming down. There's some of the brown, layering that flesh tone on top of the brown, so when it mixes, it still gives it a darker color, a darker hint. Added a little bit of brown in there with some flesh tone on top, because once I blend this with OMS, all those colors are going to melt together, and they're just going to come out being a little bit toned down, and those browns will come through on the flesh once melted. So that's one reason why I do the layering process and making sure I have my colors mixed in. So whenever I do use my OMS, it does come out and they come together nicely. So here I'm using some of my pinks, some of my reds for the internal of his ears. And if it needs to be a little bit darker with a shadow, I did put a little speck in there of some sepia, or you could even do brown, but I did a little bit of sepia in there. Outlining some of his ears right around the edges here with some of my flesh tones. Added a little bit of brown in there for some shading. And then some flesh tone over on the top of it. Adding a little bit of highlight there around the edge and filling in the rest with my flesh tone. I'm just trying to get it as close as I can to the reference photo. I don't really have any of these colors really listed, and I don't think I'm going to be able to. Some of the colors that I had such bad writing on it that it was very, very hard to see these colors, the exact colors I used. Some of them did have names to where I could read them, and others I couldn't, so I'm not able to give you the exact colors that I used. All I can say is that I did use a color chart just to kind of put them down and see what colors they look like, and just try to use the best I could on what was closest to the reference photo. So here I am blending out his head with the OMS. And as you can see, some of these shadows are starting to come up. So we got some different tones in there, and that's just because I layered in on top of that brown. Now I'm going in and around, kind of spreading out that blush a little bit, so that way it's a lot smoother. If I need to dip my brush in the OMS and then come back out, I can end up cleaning off my brush. So that way I don't have to basically smudge all the colors together, especially if you work dark to light. So blending out his ears here with the OMS. Now you're still going to have like a texture kind of look to it, which is really kind of nice with the oil pastels, is having a little bit of texture to your painting. So the next thing I'm going to do after it dries is I'm going to come back in and I'm going to just work on things that I see, like his lip there underneath his nose. It was a little bit too light, so I ended up darkening it just a little bit. I'm going to add in some more highlights to the area that needs highlights, maybe some added. Fix the correction on this little area here because I didn't really like that gray too much. So I put a little bit more white in there for a reflection. But like I said, if you guys are interested in seeing this, I will end up uploading a longer tutorial, like a longer video of this piece here for free. It will be located underneath my oil pastels that I just started doing one for a medium for that. So here I'm just kind of putting in some of my highlights back in. And it makes it a lot easier once it dries too, to be able to lay down more pigment on your board here or your paper, whichever you're using. Also, if you're new to the channel, you can please subscribe. We'd love to have you on here. And also, if you like this video, please leave a like. That definitely helps the channel. Here's a little bit more of my highlights, just going to add those in. Going in and around his little eyes there. Now, whenever I go and if I'm going to blend in any of this stuff, I am basically going to use very light on my OMS. Like, I don't want a whole bunch on my brush. If you have been using your brush, I would just pick it up and not even dip it into the OMS and just use that brush. Most likely, you're going to have enough OMS to kind of blend out some of your colors, but not all of it. Now, you don't want to blend out that much. So here I'm starting on his feet. I'm just using some browns to kind of outline the area of his little hooves here, putting down a little bit of a yellow for the highlight in and around those darker brown areas. Just kind of putting them in spots where I see them. Now I'm coming through with more of a rusty color. It's like a reddish rusty color, and I'm just putting that in the area so that way I can tone this orange. Now here's an orange, and that rusty color, once you blend it, it's really going to tone down that orange to where it's not super bright. Right now it's like pumpkin bright, but I'm just kind of laying those in some of the areas also that need to be filled in. So after I lay those down, I'm going to come back through and then I'm going to use my OMS to blend these out. And of course, it looks so much better once blended out because those colors come together so nicely. But just like everything else, I will let them dry after I use the OMS, and then I'll come back through and I'll end up adding some highlights to it. But for now, we're just going to blend this in. So that way everything is filled. You don't see the board, the gray board showing through, and the colors blend together nicely. And it also brings out some of that dark too. If you covered up some of the dark brown in there just a little bit, all you have to do is just take a nice clean brush with the OMS and just kind of stripe down where that brown line is, and it will kind of come back up. So okay, the next step here, while that dries, I'm going to go ahead and do the shamrock. Now with this here, all I did was put in a really bright green, kind of like a limey green. That area there was a little bit wet, but up here on top, I'm just adding in where the shamrocks are going to be. Putting in some mid-tone green in there. In and around the bright green. I'm not going around the edges yet. I'm just circling in and around kind of some of the center of these little circles here. Then I'm going to come in with my dark green and I'm going to go in and around the edge of the shamrock. Then also on that little bit of little bit of that dark color on the end of the little shamrock, little stem. Making sure I get that around the edges. And then I'm going to take my OMS and I'm going to start blending these out. And first thing I'm going to do is kind of do little circles in and around the highlight. And then I'm going to go around the edges and just kind of blend the darker part of this out last. So getting some of that center. Now I'm going in and around the little highlighted areas. Blending out those little circles. Smoothing and correcting around that edge there. And once I get through, I'm going to go ahead and put in my little horseshoe that I got here. I'm using more of a yellow gold color. Did try and use a little bit of copper in there, but didn't really show up that good. So I just stuck with the yellow metallic on this one. So I did go back to my metallic on the little horseshoe. Blending those out with OMS. And then we'll be able to see coming soon, we'll show you the final design here, or after it's done, basically. And like I said, if you like this, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed, we'd love to have you on the channel, so you subscribe. And if you're wanting a longer video of this and maybe just a little bit slower without anything being cut out, you can see this on my Patreon, and we'll have it uploaded in the next few days or so. And it'll be underneath the oil pastels in the categories. So here it is on my mantle. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and until next time, bye you guys.